Shakikais, CAG, this is Anvil 1-1. I am committing to the run. Deconflict your rhinos immediately. Negative, Anvil. You are not cleared into the engagement zone. That deck is hot, and you do not have the speed to punch through that screen. Abort! I repeat, abort! The radio crackled with the frantic, high-pitched urgency of Commander Viper Sterling. In the background, the screaming whine of FA-18 engines spooling up on the deck was audible, a chaotic symphony of panic. Major Elena Rossi's hand tightened around the stick of her A-10C. The airframe shuddered violently as she pushed the nose down, the gray ocean rushing up to meet her canopy like a concrete wall. She wasn't looking at a radar screen. She was looking at the smoke rising from the waterline of the USS Constitution. If I pull off, Commander, those fast boats put a hole in your hull before your jets can even get a lock, Elena said, her voice terrifyingly calm against the G-force pressing into her chest. I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you to move. Rossi, you're going to get yourself killed and embarrass this fleet. That is a direct order. Elena flipped the master arm switch. The green light of the GAU-8 Avenger illuminated her visor. Respectfully, sir. Watch me. She squeezed the trigger. The plane slowed in midair as the recoil of the 30mm cannon fought against the engines. 36 hours earlier, forward operating base, Sandstone, Pacific Theater. The Pacific sun was a physical weight, hammering down through the plexiglass canopy of the A-10C Thunderbolt II. It cooked the cockpit, turning the air inside stale and tasting of recycled rubber and sweat. Major Elena Anvil Rossi shifted in her ejection seat, trying to find a millimeter of relief where the survival harness dug into her collarbone. Sandstone Tower, this is Anvil 1-1, flight of 2, requesting approach vector. We are at Angels 5, requesting immediate slot, Elena said, keeping her voice flat. She checked her fuel gauge. They weren't critical yet, but the Warthog drank fuel in this dense, humid air. The reply was slow, almost lazy. Anvil 1-1, Sandstone. Hold at waypoint, Charlie. We have a flight of rhinos inbound for priority recovery. Maintain 5,000. Elena's jaw tightened. Rhinos. The Navy's FA-18 Super Hornets. The golden children of the fleet. Copy, Sandstone. Holding, she said, though her thumb hovered over the mic switch, wanting to say something else entirely. She banked the heavy aircraft to the left, her wingman, First Lieutenant David Gator Laus, glued to her wingtip. The A-10 was not a pretty machine. It was a bathtub made of titanium wrapped around a 30mm Gatling gun, with 2 massive turbofan engines mounted high on the tail like an afterthought. Against the backdrop of the endless azure ocean, it looked like a prehistoric beast lost in a sci-fi movie. They're making us wait. Again, Major. Gator's voice came over the interflight frequency, sounding tired. That's the 3rd time this week. Stow it, Gator. We hold until we're cleared, Elena replied. But she watched the fuel flow indicator. The needle was creeping toward the bingo line, the point of no return where they would have to divert or swim. Below them, the airstrip of Fob Sandstone, a jagged scar of concrete on a volcanic island, was busy. 2 gray specks, the Super Hornets, were on final approach, their wings glinting in the sunlight. They moved with a predatory grace that the A-10 lacked. They were fast, lethal, and expensive. Everything the Navy loved. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Sandstone, Anvil 1-1. Fuel state is approaching bingo. Request update. Elena called again. Anvil, maintain hold. We have a foul deck scenario on the recovery. Stand by. Elena looked down. The runway was clear. The F-18s were taxiing. The tower was lying, or simply didn't care. They were deprioritizing the Air Force ground pounders because they viewed them as clutter in their pristine maritime airspace. "Major," Gator said, his voice tighter now, "I'm showing 1,200 pounds. I'm getting thirsty." Elena felt the heat rise in her neck, hotter than the sun outside. It wasn't just the disrespect, it was the danger. They were pushing her pilots into a corner to save face for their own logistics. She made a decision. It was the kind of decision that ended careers, but saved airframes. Sandstone Anvil 11 is declaring pan due to fuel critical state. We are unable to maintain hold. Committing to final approach. Runway 20. Clear the box. There was a stunned silence on the radio. A pan was an urgency signal, one step below a mayday. It legally forced the controller to clear the way. Anvil 11. Say reason for emergency declaration. You were instructed to hold. The controller's voice cracked with indignation. Fuel starvation imminent if we hold another 5 mics, Tower. I'm not putting my birds in the drink so you can polish your schedule. Gator, form up combat spread. Gear down. Gear down, Gator replied, sounding both terrified and exhilarated. The A-10 dropped its heavy landing gear with a mechanical thunk that vibrated through Elena's spine. She lined up the nose with the island. The runway rushed up to meet them. As she flared for landing, she saw the ground crew scattering. A jeep painted in Navy hazard yellow was racing down the parallel taxiway, likely carrying the commander of the air group, GAU-8. Elena touched down, the tires screeching as the weight of the gun settled onto the tarmac. She didn't tap the brakes gently. She let the sheer mass of the plane announce her arrival. As she taxied to the cramped far end of the apron reserved for transient aircraft, she saw a man standing by the parking spot. He was wearing a flight suit, arms crossed, aviator sunglasses reflecting the glare. Even from inside the cockpit, she could feel the anger radiating off him. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she muttered to herself, cutting the engines. The whine of the turbines died down, replaced by the sound of the ocean and the impending storm of a screaming officer. The transition from the blistering tarmac to the briefing room was a physical shock. The Joint Operations Center was kept at a meat locker temperature to protect the banks of servers and tactical displays lining the walls. The air smelled of ozone, floor wax, and the distinct, stale aroma of burnt coffee that permeated every military command post in the world. Major Elena Rossi stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, feeling the sweat dry cold and sticky on her back. Beside her, Lieutenant Gator Laus shifted uncomfortably, looking like a child who had walked into the wrong classroom. The room was filled with the crisp, tan flight suits of the Navy aviators, men and women who flew machines worth $70 million, and looked at Elena's grimy, olive-drab flight suit with a mixture of pity and amusement. At the front of the room, Commander Sterling, call sign Viper, tapped a laser pointer against a large digital map of the Pacific Strait. He was the man she had seen on the tarmac. Up close, he was even more severe, with eyes that seemed to calculate the inefficiency of everything they landed on. "The threat environment has evolved," Sterling said, his voice smooth and practiced. "We are looking at over-the-horizon engagement. Our adversaries are using wave-skimming cruise missiles and high-speed patrol craft equipped with man-pads. Speed is life. Standoff range is survival." He clicked a remote. The screen changed to a wireframe comparison of an FA-18 Super Hornet and an A-10 Thunderbolt. A ripple of low laughter moved through the seated pilots. "Now, Command has seen fit to augment our strike group with the 75th Fighter Squadron," Sterling continued. not looking at Elena but gesturing vaguely in her direction. While we appreciate the Air Force's enthusiasm, we have to look at the physics. The A-10 has a maximum speed of roughly 380 knots. It has no radar. Its radar cross-section is effectively a barn door flying through space. Elena stepped forward. The movement was small, but it drew the room's attention. "Commander, with respect, we didn't come here to race." Sterling turned, his expression mockingly polite. "Major Rossi, I was getting to you. Please enlighten us. How does a platform designed to kill Soviet tanks in the Fulda Gap help us defend a carrier strike group in the middle of the ocean?" "Persistence," Elena said, her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "Your Hornets have a loiter time of what? 90 minutes before you need a tanker? I can stay on station for 4 hours. I can fly under the weather that grounds your sensors. If something gets inside your missile screen, you're going to want eyes on it, not a blip on a radar." Sterling smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Major, if something gets inside our missile screen, the battle is already lost. This isn't close air support in the mountains. This is literal warfare. You are bringing a knife to a nuke fight. Worse, you're a liability. If I have to divert my combat air patrol to protect your slow-moving assets from enemy interceptors, I am weakening the fleet's shield." He turned back to the Admiral sitting in the front row, a shadowy figure who had remained silent until now. "Admiral, my recommendation stands. The A-10s are incompatible with the current threat matrix. They should be relegated to logistics or rear area security." Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. It was a sensation she remembered from a valley in Afghanistan, the feeling of being too late, too slow, while the radio screamed for help. "Maybe he's right," a treacherous voice whispered in her head. "Maybe the war has finally outrun us." She looked at the diagram on the screen, the blocky silhouette of her jet next to the sleek Navy fighter. It looked archaic, obsolete. The Admiral stood up. The room went deadly silent. He looked at Elena, his face unreadable. "We don't waste assets, Commander Sterling," the Admiral said quietly. "But we also don't ignore physics. Major Rossi, I can't put you in the primary defensive screen. It's too hot." Elena kept her chin up. "Sir, we are combat ready." "I'm sure you are. But for now you're on blue water detail." The Admiral pointed to a vast, empty sector of the map, far away from the expected enemy approach vectors. "Patrol the outer perimeter. Look for fishing trawlers, drifting containers, anything that might pose a navigational hazard to the fleet. Keep your transponders on and stay out of the Navy's way." It was a garbage detail, a babysitting job. It was an insult wrapped in an order. "Understood, Admiral," Elena said, forcing the words through clenched teeth. Sterling caught her eye as the briefing dispersed. "Try not to get lost out there, Major. It's a big ocean." "Don't worry, Commander," Elena replied, her voice dropping to a low growl that only he could hear. "We like it down in the weeds. You tend to see things the high flyers miss." She turned on her heel and walked out, grabbing Gator by the shoulder as they exited. She could feel the eyes of the Navy pilots on her back, burning like radar locks. They thought she was finished. They thought the Warthog was a joke. "Load the guns," Elena said to Gator as they hit the humid outside air. "Ma'am, for a trash patrol?" Gator asked, confused. "Full combat load," she ordered, putting her sunglasses back on to hide the fury in her eyes. "Armor-piercing incendiary. Because when the Navy is wrong, they're usually dead wrong." 2 hours at 500 feet was enough to make anyone question their life choices. For an A-10 pilot, it was a test of physical endurance. The air conditioning in the Thunderbolt II was notoriously weak, struggling against the tropical humidity that seeped through the seals of the cockpit. Elena Rossi sat in a pool of her own sweat, the constant low-frequency vibration of the twin TF-34 engines rattling her teeth. Below them, the Pacific Ocean was a relentless, blinding sheet of sapphire. There were no landmarks, no terrain to mask behind, just endless water. They were flying Blue Water Ops, a mission profile the A-10 was never designed for, patrolling the outer ring of the fleet's exclusion zone, a sector the Navy deemed too boring for their precious Super Hornets. "Status check, Gator," Elena said, checking her mirrors. "Green across the board, Major. Bored out of my skull, but green?" Gator's voice crackled back. "My fuel flow is good. My bladder is another story. Keep it professional. Eyes outside." As if on cue, a sonic boom slapped the airframe, followed instantly by a shadow flashing over Elena's canopy. The A-10 shuddered in the turbulent wake as two FA-18s pulled a vertical climb directly in front of them, their afterburners glowing like twin cigarettes in the daylight. "Anvil Flight, this is Stingray 2-1?" A voice laughed over the guard frequency. "Just checking if you folks were still awake down there. Try not to stall out. We'd hate to have to fish you out of the drink." Elena gripped the stick, correcting the wobble caused by their jet wash. The Navy pilots were treating them like traffic cones on a highway. "Stingray Anvil. Maintain separation," Elena replied, keeping her voice icy. "You are violating safe distance protocols." "Copy that, Grandma. We're RTB. Enjoy the view." The Hornets rolled inverted and shot away toward the carrier group, disappearing into the haze within seconds. "I hate them," Gator muttered. "I genuinely hate them." "Ignore it. Focus on the water," Elena ordered, though her own knuckles were white. She scanned the horizon, her eyes narrowing. The Navy relied on the Link 16 data network and powerful AESA radars to see the world. They saw red squares and blue circles on a screen. Elena saw waves, whitecaps, and shadows. She saw the texture of the ocean, and she saw something that didn't fit. "Gator, extend combat spread to 1 mile. I've got a contact at 2 o'clock. Low profile." "I don't see anything on the RWR, Major. My scope is clean." "That's because it's not emitting," Elena said. She banked the Warthog right, dropping down to 300 feet. The ocean rushed by in a blur of speed. There, bobbing in the trough of a large swell, was a vessel. It was painted a dull, rusty blue, designed to blend in with the water. To a high-flying jet, it would look like sea clutter. To a radar, it might look like a large wave. Elena engaged a shallow orbit, banking hard to keep the target off her left wingtip. Looked like a fishing trawler, maybe 60 feet long. Nets were draped over the stern. But something was wrong. The waterline was too high. It was riding light, as if empty of fish. And amidst the rusted rigging, she saw the glint of fresh copper wire. "Overlord, this is Anvil 1-1. Elena keyed the radio to the AWACS controller circling somewhere in the stratosphere. "Visual contact on surface vessel Sector 4 Alpha. Type matches commercial trawler, but behavior is suspicious. No AIS transponder active. Request intel check." The pause was long enough to be insulting. "Anvil, Overlord. We have no tracks in that sector. You're likely seeing a biological. Whales have been reported in the area." "Negative, Overlord. It is a hard target. It has antennas that don't belong on a fishing boat. I'm going down for a PID pass." "Anvil, advise you maintain altitude. Do not harass civilian traffic. We have a weather system moving into your sector. RTB is recommended." Elena cursed silently. They weren't listening. They were looking at their pristine screens, seeing nothing, and assuming she was hallucinating from the heat. "Gator, cover me high. I'm doing a flyby." Elena pushed the nose down. She leveled off at 100 feet, screaming over the wave tops. As she roared over the trawler, she looked down through the side of her canopy. There were no fishermen on deck. The wheelhouse windows were blacked out, but for a split second, just as the shadow of her wing swept over the deck, she saw a tarp flap in the wind. Underneath wasn't a crate of fish. It was a metallic gray tube, bolted to the deck. "Gator, did you see that?" "Negative, Major. I'm watching your 6. What was it?" "It looked like a launcher. Pneumatic, maybe." Elena pulled up, converting her speed into altitude. She keyed the mic again. "Overlord, suspect vessel is armed. Requesting permission to fire warning shots across the bow to force a stop." "Negative, Anvil. Absolutely negative. You are not cleared to engage a civilian vessel on a hunch. Return to base immediately. That is a direct order. The squall line is crossing your return vector." Elena looked back at the ocean. The trawler was turning now, heading straight into a wall of dark gray mist that was rolling across the water like a curtain. The weather front, the one the Navy was worried about, was swallowing the sector. "Major," Gator said, urgency in his voice. "Fuel is getting tight, and that storm looks nasty." Elena watched the rusty ship disappear into the fog bank. She knew what she had seen. It wasn't a fishing boat. It was a scout, a spotter, and the Navy had just ordered her to let it go. "Copy, Overlord," she said, the taste of bile in her throat. "Anvil flight is RTB." As she turned the heavy jet toward the distant island, the first drops of rain hit the canopy, streaking the glass like tears. The ocean behind them was now empty, hiding its secrets under the coming storm. The sky over FOB sandstone had turned the color of a fresh bruise, purple, black, and angry. The wind wasn't just blowing anymore. It was shrieking, a sustained, discordant note that cut through the heavy ear protection Elena wore. By the time Elena and Gator taxied their A-10s back to the transient apron, the base was in a state of controlled chaos. Yellow tractors towed FA-18s into the massive concrete-reinforced hangars, their folding wings swept up like praying mantises. The Navy ground crews moved with frantic efficiency, sealing the expensive jets away from the salt and the impending violence of the typhoon. Elena popped the canopy, and the gale immediately snatched her checklist, ripping it from her kneeboard and sending it tumbling into the darkness. Rain stung her face like birdshot. She signaled Gator to cut engines. As the turbines spun down, the silence was instantly filled by the roar of the ocean crashing against the sea wall a few hundred yards away. A Navy Master Chief in a yellow rain slicker drove up in a tug, waving a glowing orange baton. He didn't offer a tow. He just signaled for them to park where they were, out in the open, exposed to the full fury of the coming fetch. Elena scrambled down the ladder, her boots slipping on the wet rungs. She grabbed the Master Chief by the shoulder of his slicker to be heard over the wind. "Chief, we need hangar space. The wind gusts are predicted to hit 80 knots. These birds have a high wing surface area. They'll flip if they aren't sheltered." The Master Chief shook his head, water streaming from the brim of his cover. "No can do, Major. The inn is full. CAG's orders. All rhinos and Hawkeyes get priority. We're packing them in tight. You're going to have to tie down on the ramp." "This ramp is exposed," Elena shouted, gesturing to the open expanse of concrete. "If debris hits my engines, we're done." "Take it up with ops. I got 3 more Super Hornets to stash before the siren blows." The chief pulled away, climbing back into his tug and speeding off toward the warm, dry hangars. Elena watched him go, a cold fury burning in her gut that had nothing to do with the temperature. They were leaving the Warthogs to die. "Major!" Gator was at her side holding his helmet. He looked pale. "The gust locks aren't going to hold in 80 knots. We need heavy chains, and we need windbreaks." Elena looked around. The flight line was emptying out. The only people left were a group of Marines near a row of blast barriers, heavy concrete dividers used to deflect jet exhaust. They were struggling to secure a stack of crates. "Get the intake covers on," Elena ordered, "and double-chock the wheels. I'll be right back." She ran toward the Marines, head down against the wind. As she got closer, she saw a gunnery sergeant barking orders at his squad. "Gunny!" she yelled. The Marine turned, surprised to see an Air Force officer running through the mud. "Major, you should be inside. Condition 1 is in effect." "I need your help," Elena said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "The Navy locked us out. I need those blast barriers moved to shield my aircraft. And I need your heavy transport chains. The standard flight line gear is too light." The gunny looked past her at the two dark silhouettes of the A-10s, sitting alone and defiant in the rain. Then he looked back at the closed doors of the Navy hangars. He spat on the ground. "They left the hogs out?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "They left us out," Elena confirmed. The gunny grinned, showing teeth. "My brother was in Fallujah. Said that gun of yours saved his platoon twice. Marines don't forget, ma'am." He turned to his squad. "Miller, Gomez, bring the forklift. We're moving the barriers. Get the heavy chains off the 7-ton trucks. Move!" For the next hour, rank didn't matter. Elena, Gator, and the squad of Marines worked in the driving rain. They maneuvered the massive concrete barriers into a V-shape around the noses of the A-10s, creating a makeshift windbreak. They lashed the landing gear to the ground with chains thick enough to anchor a tank. Elena's hands were raw, her knuckles scraped and bleeding, grease mixing with the rain on her face. She tightened the last turnbuckle on her nose gear, the metal biting into her palm. She felt a strange sense of peace. This was where she belonged, not in the air-conditioned briefing rooms with the polished officers, but here in the mud and the noise, sweating alongside the grunts who knew the value of dirty work. "That's it, ma'am! She ain't going nowhere!" the gunny shouted, slapping the wet fuselage of the A-10. Elena wiped her face with a soaked sleeve. "I owe you a case of whatever you drink, gunny. Just keep the rain off our heads when the shooting starts, Major." They retreated to the small, corrugated metal shack the Marines were using as a temporary command post. It smelled of wet wool and CLP gun oil. As Elena unzipped her survival vest, a young corporal ran in from the comms room, holding a printout. "Gunny, Ops just broadcast a fleet-wide alert. Intelligence update." Elena stepped forward, water dripping from her hair onto the concrete floor. "What is it?" The corporal looked at her, then at the paper. "Satellite pass right before the cloud cover closed in. They lost track of the enemy fleet, ma'am, but the last thermal signature showed them breaking formation." "Breaking formation?" Elena asked, a chill running down her spine. "Yes, ma'am. They aren't huddling for the storm. They turned into it. They're using the typhoon as cover to sprint toward the strait." Elena looked out the small, rain-streaked window. The Navy was huddled in their hangars, blind and deaf. And out there, in the chaos of the storm, the enemy was coming. The Joint Operations Center at FOB Sandstone was usually a cathedral of information, a place where the god of war was quantified in pixels and data streams, Tonight, it was a tomb of static. Elena stood in the back of the room, still wearing her wet flight suit, the smell of rain and JP-8 fuel clinging to her. The large main screen, which usually displayed a pristine common operating picture of the entire theater, was a mess of jagged green noise. The typhoon wasn't just a weather event, it was an electronic wall. Gain is down to minimum, sir. I'm still getting ghost returns everywhere, a radar operator said, his voice tight. The sea state is tossing waves 30 feet high. The radar can't tell the difference between a whitecap and a hull. Admiral Vance, who had come ashore to coordinate the island's defenses, stood with his hands gripping the back of the operator's chair. What about the Hawkeye? Can the E-2 see through this? Negative, Admiral. The E-2 had to land an hour ago. Turbulence was exceeding airframe limits. We are reliant on shipboard sensors. Elena watched the screen. The green clutter, the reflection of radar energy off the rain and the churning ocean surface, had effectively blinded the most advanced naval force on the planet. Billions of dollars in Aegis defense systems were being defeated by water. Viper 1 is on station, the radio speaker crackled. It was Commander Sterling. Despite the weather grounding the E-2, Sterling had launched a section of Super Hornets to try and visually verify the intelligence report. Viper, this is Sandstone Command. What do you see? The Admiral asked. I see the inside of a washing machine, Command. Sterling's voice came back, distorted by the static of the storm. Flyar is washed out. The rain is cooling the surface so much there's no thermal contrast. My radar is painting targets that aren't there. I'm getting locks on cloud formations. Elena stepped closer to the console. She knew what was happening. The FA-18's AN/APG-79 radar was a miracle of technology, designed to track supersonic missiles and fighters in the stratosphere. But down low, in the mud, trying to pick out small, slow targets amidst a raging typhoon, it was confused. It was too smart for its own good. Viper, drop to 500. Get under the ceiling, Elena murmured, almost to herself. As if he heard her, Sterling's voice came back. Descending to Angels, point 5. Trying to get a visual. There was a long pause. The static hissed. The room held its breath. Negative contact, Sterling shouted, frustration bleeding into his tone. Visibility is 0. I can't see my own wingman. If there's anything down there, they're ghosts. We are fuel critical and returning to the Constitution. Copy, Viper. RTB, the Admiral said, straightening up. He looked tired. If Sterling can't see them, they aren't there. It must have been a sensor glitch on the satellite. No fleet moves in this weather. Elena felt a cold prickle on the back of her neck. The Navy assumed that because they couldn't operate, no one could. It was a dangerous mirror imaging bias. Admiral, Elena said, speaking up for the first time. The room turned to look at her. The intel said they were breaking formation. Small boats. Fast attack craft. Those don't show up on radar in a storm like this. They're made of fiberglass and wood. They hug the troughs of the waves. Major Rossi, the Admiral said, his voice dismissive. We have the most sophisticated sensor suite in the world. If a fleet was approaching, we would know. Not if they aren't a fleet, sir. Not if they're a swarm. And not if they're using the storm noise to hide their engines. Before the Admiral could respond, a red light began to flash on the communications console. A high-pitched, dissonant alarm cut through the hum of the servers. Sir, urgent transmission. It's the USS Halsey. They're the picket destroyer on the northern perimeter. The comms officer threw the switch, and the room filled with the sound of gunfire. It wasn't the rhythmic thumping of heavy cannons. It was the frantic, tearing sound of close-quarters automatic weapons. "Mayday! Mayday! This is Halsey! We are taking fire! Multiple contacts! They're all over us! They came out of the rain! We can't depress our guns low enough! They're boarding! I repeat, they are—" The transmission cut out with a sharp squeal of feedback, replaced instantly by the indifference of white noise. The Admiral stared at the speaker, his face draining of color. The map on the big screen showed the Halsey as a lonely blue diamond, 20 miles out in the dark, completely alone. "Get Viper back in the air!" the Admiral roared. "He's already in the landing pattern, sir. He can't turn around with that fuel load, and we can't launch another cycle in this wind." Elena looked at the map. The Navy was paralyzed. Their tech was blind. Their jets were leashed. "I can go," she said. Her voice was quiet, but in the sudden silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. The silence following the Halsey's cut transmission was heavier than the storm outside. In the small office adjoining the operations center, the walls vibrated rhythmically as wind gusts slammed against the reinforced concrete. The lights flickered, casting long, unstable shadows across Admiral Vance's face. "I can be airborne in 10 minutes, sir," Elena said, standing at attention. She kept her voice level, fighting the urge to scream at the inertia gripping the command staff. "My birds are already on the line. The engines are cold cranked. We're ready." Admiral Vance turned away from the situation map, rubbing his temples. He looked like a man trying to solve an equation where all the variables were missing. "Major, you heard Commander Sterling. The visibility is 0. The ceiling is on the deck, and we don't know what hit the Halsey. If it's a trap, if there are enemy fighters waiting above that storm cell. If there were fighters, your radar would have seen them before the clutter set in," Elena countered, stepping forward. "This is a surface swarm. They're hugging the waves. Your Hornets are too fast to engage them visually without crashing into the water. I can fly at 130 knots. I can loiter. I can see what your sensors can't. You can also get shot down by a single man-pads," Vance snapped, his patience fraying. "The A-10 is a flying tank, yes, but it's slow. If you get out there and find a modern Corvette with surface-to-air missiles, you're dead. I've already lost contact with the destroyer. I am not going to throw 2 obsolete aircraft into the meat grinder just to see what happens." The word obsolete hit Elena like a physical blow. It was the same argument she had heard her entire career. Too slow, too old, too ugly. "Sir, those sailors are dying right now," Elena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "They are being boarded. Close air support is my job. It doesn't matter if it's a tank in the desert or a boat in the ocean. A target is a target. Let me do my job." Vance looked at her, and for a moment, she saw a flicker of hesitation. He looked at the red marker on the map where the Halsey used to be. Then, the mask of command slid back into place. He was a Navy officer, thinking in terms of fleet preservation and calculated risk. The math didn't work in her favor. "We are organizing a rescue task force," Vance said formally. "The Constitution is turning into the wind to launch a full strike package once the squall line passes. We will send a SAR helo when it's safe." "When it's safe?" Elena repeated, incredulous. "By the time the weather clears, that ship will be at the bottom or under an enemy flag. Sir, I am begging you, give me a weapons-free authorization." "Negative," Vance said. The finality in his voice was absolute. "That is a direct order, Major Rossi. You are to stand down. Your aircraft are to remain grounded until Condition 1 is lifted. Do not make me relieve you of command." Elena felt a hot flush of shame and anger. Part of her wondered if she was pushing this hard because she truly believed she could save them, or because she was desperate to prove that she and her plane still mattered. Was it heroism or hubris? "Understood, Admiral," she said, the words tasting like ash. "Standing down." She saluted, a sharp, rigid motion that conveyed no respect, only compliance. She turned and walked out of the office, back into the chaos of the operations center. The radio operators were still calling the Halsey, their voices echoing into the void. "Halsey, this is Sandstone. Come in. Halsey, acknowledge." Elena pushed through the heavy steel doors and out into the corridor leading to the flight line exit. The wind howled through the cracks in the doorframe. She zipped up her flight suit, her hands trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that had nowhere to go. She had her orders. She was supposed to sit and wait while good men died. She stopped at the door, her hand on the crash bar. She thought of the gunny and his Marines moving the barriers in the rain. She thought of the fishing boat she had seen, the one the Navy had dismissed. "To hell with the math," she whispered. She pushed the door open and stepped into the storm. The wind on the flight line was a physical assault, tearing at Elena's flight suit and forcing her to lean at a 45-degree angle just to stay upright. The rain came horizontal, illuminated by the harsh, flickering halogen floodlights that turned the tarmac into a slick, black mirror. She reached the revetment where the Marines had stacked the concrete barriers. Her A-10 Iron Maiden sat dark and hulking in the shadows, looking more like a piece of industrial machinery than an aircraft. Huddled under the wing, trying to keep a tablet dry, was Master Sergeant Kowalski, her lead crew chief. Elena grabbed his shoulder, shouting over the gale. "Chief, prep for immediate start! Pull the pins and get the chocks out!" Kowalski looked at her, water dripping from his nose. He blinked, confused. "Major, the field is red. Tower just broadcast a condition 1. Nothing moves." "I'm moving," Elena yelled back, her face inches from his. "I need you to clear the red gear, now." Kowalski didn't move. He was a 20-year veteran, a man who lived by the technical orders and the flight schedule. "Ma'am, I can't do that. Ops hasn't sent a ticket. If I launch you without a release, I lose my stripes. You lose your wings. We all go to Leavenworth." Behind her, Gator stumbled up, breathless. "Major, are we really doing this?" The Admiral said, "Stand down." Elena turned to look at them both. The rain matted her hair to her forehead. In that moment, the roar of the storm faded, replaced by a memory that had haunted her for 5 years. The Konar Valley. A radio screaming for help. Her circling overhead, waiting for a PID that came too late. She had followed the rules then, and 6 men had come home in flag-draped boxes. "The Halsey is gone, Chief," Elena said, her voice cutting through the wind like a knife. "They didn't just lose comms. They were overrun. There are 300 sailors in that water or fighting for their lives right now. The Navy is sitting on its hands because their computers don't work in the rain. We are the only ones who can help them." She looked at Gator. "You don't have to come, David. You can stay here. I'll take the heat." Gator looked at the dark cockpit of his jet, then at Elena. He swallowed hard, rain mixing with the sweat on his face. "You're my flight lead, Elena. You don't go alone." Elena turned back to Kowalski. She didn't order him this time. She just looked at him. "Chief, please." Kowalski looked at the closed doors of the Navy, hangars, warm and dry and useless. He looked at the A-10, the ugly, scarred beast that he had kept flying with duct tape and prayers. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the wet concrete. "God help us all," Kowalski muttered. He turned to his assistant crew chiefs who were sheltering nearby. "All right, you heard the Major? Pull the pins. Remove before flight streamers. Get 'em off. Crank the APUs. Let's get these hogs moving before the MPs show up." The crew sprang into action, galvanized by the sudden shift from waiting to working. Elena scrambled up the ladder, vaulting into the cockpit. It was humid and smelled of old sweat inside. She strapped in with trembling hands, not bothering with the full checklist. Battery on, inverter standby, APU start. The high-pitched whine of the auxiliary power unit spooled up, a piercing scream that cut through the storm. Moments later, the left engine began to rotate, the heavy fan blades churning the wet air. Then the right. Elena pulled her helmet on, the noise dampening to a dull roar. She flipped the radio to the discrete squadron frequency, bypassing the monitored command channels. "Anvil 2, radio check," she said. "2 is up, loud and clear," Gator replied. His voice was shaking slightly. "Armament panel set to live. Master arm on. We aren't asking for permission to taxi, Gator. We're taking it." She released the parking brake. The A-10 lurched forward. As she steered the heavy jet out of the revetment and onto the main taxiway, she saw the lights of a security truck flashing in the distance, racing toward them. "Sandstone Tower, this is Anvil 1-1, she broadcast on the guard frequency, her voice absolute steel. "Flight of 2 A-10s taxiing to runway 20 for immediate departure. Emergency SAR operations." "Anvil 1-1, hold your position." The tower controller's voice was shrill, bordering on panic. "The runway is closed. You are not cleared. Stop your aircraft immediately, or you will be fired upon by base security." Elena watched the jeep speeding down the access road, blue lights swirling in the rain. She pushed the throttles forward. "Anvil is unable to comply," she said. "Clear the runway tower. We're coming out." The A-10C vibrated violently, shaking like a wet dog as Elena held the wheel brakes locked. She pushed the throttles all the way forward to the stops. The twin General Electric TF-34 engines behind her screamed, their high bypass whine rising to a deafening shriek that battled the roar of the typhoon. Through the rain-lashed canopy, the runway lights of FOB sandstone were nothing but smeared streaks of yellow in the darkness. The asphalt was a river of black water. To her right, the security truck had skidded to a halt near the taxiway entrance, its spotlight searching for her cockpit, blinding and accusatory. "Anvil 2, verify engine instruments green." Elena's voice was calm, a practiced mask over the terror, coiling in her stomach. "2 is green. Oil pressure fluctuating slightly, but within limits." "I'm ready, boss," Gator replied. He sounded breathless. "Listen to me, David. Crabbing technique is going to be extreme. Do not fight the yaw with the rudder until you have airflow. Keep the stick into the wind. Rotate at 130 knots. Do not pull early, or you will stall. Copy?" "Copy. 130. Sandstone Tower, Anvil flight rolling," Elena announced. She didn't wait for a reply. She released the brakes. The Warthog didn't leap forward. It lumbered. Loaded with fuel and a full drum of 30mm ammunition, it was heavy. The wind immediately tried to weather vane the aircraft, pushing the massive vertical stabilizers. The nose swung violently to the left. Elena kicked the right rudder pedal to the floor, wrestling the nose wheel straight. The tires sprayed massive plumes of water, creating a whiteout behind her that blinded Gator. She had to trust he was keeping his distance. 60 knots. The runway markers flashed by. The wind was gusting from the right at 50 knots. 20 knots over the crosswind limit for the airframe. She had to bank the stick into the wind, dipping the right wing low just to keep the upwind tires on the ground. It felt unnatural, like driving a car on two wheels. 100 knots. The stick began to come alive in her hand, the control surfaces finally biting into the air. But the turbulence was horrific. The plane bucked and slammed against the tarmac. Every bump sent a shock wave through her spine. V1, she whispered to herself. Decision speed. If she aborted now, she'd slide off the end of the runway and burn 130 knots. Rotate. Elena pulled back on the stick. The nose wheel lifted. The main gear held on for a second longer, dragging through the standing water, and then they were airborne. Wham! The instant the wheels left the friction of the ground, the wind took them. A massive shear hit the aircraft from the side. The A-10 was swatted like a fly. The right wing dropped dangerously, the tip tank missing the runway lights by inches. The stall warning horn blared in her headset. Beep, 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 pull up! Power, power! Elena screamed, slamming the throttles past the detent, demanding every ounce of thrust the engines had. She fought the urge to jerk the stick back, which would stall the wing completely. Instead, she coordinated the rudder and aileron, forcing the nose down slightly to gain airspeed. It was counterintuitive. The ground was right there, rushing by in a blur of wet foliage, but she had to dive to fly. The airspeed indicator crept up. 135, 140, the lift caught. The heavy wings bit into the storm. Elena hauled back, and the Warthog clawed its way into the black sky. "Gator, report!" she yelled, scanning her mirrors. She couldn't see him. I'm up! I'm up!" Gator's voice cracked. "Jesus, I almost scraped the Sombem. Fence! I'm drifting hard left. Form up on my strobe. Get out of the chaotic air near the ground. Climb to Angels 1. They punched into the cloud layer at 500 feet. Instantly, the world disappeared. There was no up, no down, no ocean, no sky. Just a gray void illuminated by the strobe lights flashing on her wingtips. The rain sounded like gravel being thrown against the canopy. Elena's inner ear began to tumble. The vertigo hit her, the leans, telling her she was banking right when her instruments said she was level. She locked her eyes on the attitude director indicator, ADI. Trust the instrument. The instrument is truth. Your body is a liar. Anvil flight, Sandstone departure. A new voice came on the radio. It wasn't the panicked tower controller. It was a deeper, resigned voice. Radar contact. You are entering uncontrolled airspace. Squawk emergency. Good luck, Anvil. They had stopped trying to call her back. They were letting her go. Copy, Sandstone. Squawking 7700, Elena said. She exhaled a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the throttle quadrant to steady them. Gator, fence in, she ordered, her voice returning to the cold cadence of combat. Master arm on. Guns, flares, chaff. We're going hunting in the dark. Copy, Master arm on, Gator replied. Where are we going, boss? I can't see the nose of my own plane. Elena checked the GPS coordinates for the last known position of the USS Halsey. Follow the needle, Gator, she said, looking into the swirling gray nothingness ahead. We're going down to the deck. Descending, Elena said, her voice tight. Watch your radalt. Do not trust your eyes until you see foam. The A-10s pushed their noses down into the abyss. The gray soup of the clouds grew darker, shifting from charcoal to absolute black as they dropped away from the faint, ambient light of the upper atmosphere. The radar altimeter on the heads-up display unwound rapidly. 2,000 feet, 1,500. Betty, the aircraft's voice warning system, began to complain in her ear. Altitude. Altitude. Ignore her, Elena whispered, sweat stinging her eyes. Keep coming down. At 300 feet, the world suddenly gained texture. The bottom of the cloud layer ripped open, revealing the ocean below. It was a terrifying sight. The Pacific was heaving, mountains of black water rising and falling in the gale. Whitecaps streaked the surface like scars. The rain here was torrential, a solid sheet of water that hammered against the windscreen with the force of gravel. "Visual on the water," Gator called out, his voice high with relief. "I'm leveling at 200. My God, look at those waves." "Stay focused. Master caution is off. Eyes on the horizon," Elena ordered. She scanned the darkness, looking for the geometric hard lines of a ship against the organic chaos of the storm. The IFF, identification friend or foe, interrogator on her dashboard, was chirping intermittently, picking up a faint, garbled transponder signal somewhere to the north. "I've got a weak squawk," Elena said. "Bearing 350, 5 miles. Prepare for combat spread. If we take fire, break left and climb." They thundered over the wavetops, the salt spray mixing with the rain. The A-10s were flying in their element now, down in the dirt, where the air was thick and the flying was visceral. Then Elena saw it. A flash of light, dull and orange, bloomed in the distance, instantly swallowed by the rain. Then another. Then a steady stream of green tracers arching into the sky. "Contact light, 12 o'clock!" Elena shouted. "Going to weapons hot!" She pushed the throttle, closing the distance. As the shape of the USS Halsey emerged from the gloom, Elena's breath hitched in her throat. The destroyer was listing heavily to port. Smoke poured from its superstructure, whipped flat against the water by the typhoon winds. But it was what surrounded the ship that made Elena's blood run cold. The ocean around the Halsey was alive. It wasn't a few patrol boats, it was a carpet of them. Hundreds of small, low-profile skiffs were swarming the destroyer like piranhas attacking a wounded whale. They were bouncing violently on the waves, disappearing into the troughs and reappearing only to fire rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns at the destroyer's bridge and deck. "Holy Mother of..." Gator trailed off. "Major, there are too many of them. It looks like the whole ocean is moving." The Halsey was fighting, back, but it was a losing battle. Its main 5-inch gun was pointed awkwardly at the sky, likely jammed or unable to depress low enough to hit the small boats hugging its hull. The Phalanx CIWS, the automated Gatling gun designed to shoot down missiles, was spinning wildly, firing bursts of white tracers that sawed through 1 or 2 skiffs. But for every one it destroyed, 5 more closed the gap. "They're grappling!" Elena yelled, seeing movement on the destroyer's flight deck. "They're trying to board!" The enemy strategy was brutal and primitive. They were using the storm to nullify the Navy's high-tech advantage, overwhelming the ship with sheer numbers. The radar couldn't track 300 wooden boats bobbing in 30-foot waves. "Major, I'm picking up man-pads launches," Gator screamed. "Flares! Flares!" 2 streaks of smoke corkscrewed up from the swarm, locking onto the heat of the A-10 engines. Elena didn't think. She reacted. "Brake right! Chaff and flares!" She slammed the stick over, thumbing the countermeasure dispense button. Bursts of magnesium popped behind her, creating hot decoys for the heat-seeking missiles. She felt the thump of a detonation nearby, close enough to rattle the airframe, but no impact. She pulled the A-10 around in a tight, crushing turn, bleeding airspeed to keep the ship in sight. She looked down at the nightmare below. The Halsey was being eaten alive. The crew didn't need a missile strike or a computer hack. They needed a hammer. "Gator, listen to me," Elena said, her voice deadly calm amidst the alarm screaming in her cockpit. "We can't use the Mavericks. We'll hit the ship. It's going to be guns. We have to scrub the hull." "Scrub the hull? Major, that's danger close. We're talking feet." "Select Passy 1, Elena ordered, flipping the switch to activate the stabilization system for the GAU-8 Avenger cannon. The green crosshair appeared on her HUD. "If we don't clear that deck, everyone on that ship dies in 5 minutes. Follow my tracers. Attack axis from stern to bow. Do not hit the bridge." She rolled the Warthog inverted, pulling the nose down until the burning silhouette of the Halsey filled her windscreen. She was going to strafe a friendly ship to save it. It was madness. It was the only option left. "Anvil 1. In hot," she whispered. The world narrowed down to the glowing green pipper on the heads-up display. The rain smeared the canopy, but Elena didn't wipe it. Her hands were busy fighting the turbulence that threatened to throw the 30-ton aircraft into the sea. She was diving at a shallow angle, 300 knots, lining up parallel to the port side of the USS Halsey. The destroyer looked small and fragile against the heaving black ocean. Through the storm, she could see the muzzle flashes of small arms fire on the deck, sailors fighting hand-to-hand with the boarders who were climbing up grappling nets thrown from the skiffs. "Steady, steady," Elena breathed, her voice a mantra. The computer flashed a break X warning, telling her she was too close, too low, that a collision was imminent. She ignored it. She needed to be close. The 30mm rounds from the GAU-8 spread out over distance. To surgically remove the attackers without sawing the Halsey in half, she had to be practically looking them in the eye. She aimed for the waterline, just mere feet from the destroyer's hull, where a cluster of 5 skiffs were knotted together, pumping RPGs into the superstructure. Elena squeezed the 2-stage trigger. First, the stabilization system locked the control surfaces. Then, the gun spoke. "Brat!" The sound was not a gunshot. It was a tearing of the atmosphere. The entire airframe shuddered violently as the 7-barrel Gatling gun spun up, spitting depleted uranium shells at a rate of 65 rounds per second. The recoil was so immense, 10,000 pounds of force, that the A-10 visibly slowed in mid-air, the deceleration throwing Elena forward against her harness. A line of white-hot destruction erupted from the nose of the jet. The tracers looked like a solid laser beam connecting the aircraft to the ocean. The impact was catastrophic. The heavy rounds didn't just penetrate the fiberglass skiffs, they disintegrated them. Wood, metal, and bodies were vaporized in a mist of red and white spray. The water around the Halsey boiled as the high-explosive incendiary rounds detonated on contact with the waves and the enemy hulls. "Pulling off!" Elena grunted, hauling the stick back just as the superstructure of the destroyer loomed in her windscreen. She cleared the ship's antenna array by less than 50 feet, the heat of the ship's burning deck washing over her sensors. "Anvil 2, rifle!" Gator shouted. He came in behind her, his aim slightly wider, walking a line of fire across a second group of boats, attempting to flank the ship's bow. Elena craned her neck, looking back over her shoulder. The port side of the Halsey was clear. The grappling nets had been severed, the boats reduced to burning driftwood. "Sandstone, Anvil 1. Effects on target," Elena reported, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Port side boarders neutralized." The radio crackled, cutting through the static. It wasn't the base. It was the ship. "Anvil flight. This is Halsey Tactical. God bless you, you ugly bastards. That was too close for comfort, but we are clear. Repeat, port side clear. The relief in the sailor's voice was palpable, but short-lived. Be advised, Anvil, the Halsey controller continued, his voice pitching up. The main body of the swarm is breaking off. They aren't retreating. They're ignoring us. Elena leveled her wings at 500 feet, banking hard to get a view of the wider ocean. The tracers and explosions around the destroyer were dying down. The hundreds of remaining skiffs, the ones that hadn't engaged yet, were turning in unison. They were forming a wedge, cutting through the waves with renewed speed. They were heading southeast. Elena glanced at her digital map. Southeast was empty ocean. There was nothing there except her blood ran cold. Gator, check your vector, she said. Where are they going? Bearing 135, Major. They're moving fast. 30, maybe 40 knots. 135, Elena muttered. She zoomed out on her tactical display. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The Constitution, the carrier. The Navy flagship had turned into the wind to launch aircraft, moving away from the protection of its escort screen to find cleaner air. In doing so, it had inadvertently positioned itself directly in the path of the swarm, and with the storm blinding its sensors, the carrier was a sitting duck, a floating city of 5,000 souls, currently deaf, dumb, and blind. They used the Halsey as a distraction, Elena said, the horror of the tactic dawning on her. They drew the escorts out, jammed the radar, and now they're going for the Queen. She slammed the throttle forward. Anvil 2, form up. We're burning for the carrier. Push it to the firewall. Copy burning. The two Warthogs banked away from the burning destroyer, chasing the wake of the enemy fleet into the heart of the storm. The Halsey was safe, but the real battle was just beginning. The A-10s were pushing their operational limits. The engines whined in a pitch that bordered on painful as Elena forced the heavy aircraft through the wall of rain. They were flying at Cherubs 2, 200 feet, skimming just above the chaotic surface of the ocean. Fuel check, Elena barked. 3,000 pounds. I'm good for the fight, but the return trip is going to be on fumes, Gator replied. Ammo state is 1,000 rounds remaining. Make them count. Burst fire only, Elena ordered. On the tactical display, the blue diamond of the USS Constitution was getting closer. The massive nuclear-powered carrier had turned into the wind, steaming at 30 knots to launch its alert fighters. In doing so, it had unknowingly presented its stern, its most vulnerable angle, to the approaching swarm. Constitution strike, this is Anvil 1-1 on guard, Elena broadcasted, her voice cutting through the static. You have a massive surface contact approaching from your 6 o'clock. Distance 4 miles. Recommend immediate hard starboard turn. The response from the carrier was confused. Anvil, this is Strike. We have no contacts on scope. Our stern sector is clear. We are launching aircraft. Stay clear of the departure corridor. They don't see them, Gator whispered, horrified. The wake turbulence from the carrier is masking the boats. Visual! Elena yelled. Through a break in the squall line, the USS Constitution appeared. It was a floating city of gray steel, lights struggling against the gloom. And behind it, trailing like a pack of wolves chasing a bison, was the V formation of the enemy boats. There were at least 50 of them left, cutting through the carrier's massive wake, closing the distance with terrifying speed. Above the carrier, the afterburners of 2 Super Hornets glowed like angry eyes in the clouds. It was Viper Flight, Sterling and his wingman desperately trying to find a solution. Viper 1, I see them! Sterling's voice cracked over the radio. I'm Tally. Multiple fast attack craft closing on the stern. Engage, Viper, engage! The carrier controller screamed. I can't! Sterling shouted back, the frustration raw in his voice. I can't get a tone. The radar is awash. I'm trying to use the gun, but the computer won't settle. It's too turbulent down there. Elena watched as a sleek FA-18 swooped down, its nose hunting for a target. But the jet was too fast. By the time Sterling lined up on a bobbing boat, he had already overshot. He pulled up hard, his afterburners lighting up the rain, powerless. The mighty Super Hornet, the apex predator of the sky, was useless in this knife fight. The hierarchy of the fleet had just collapsed. The technology that cost millions had failed. Viper, clear the lane, Elena said. Her voice was no longer asking, it was commanding. Anvil is taking the lead. Rossi? Sterling's voice was breathless. They're too close to the fantail. If you miss, you hit the flight deck. Then I won't miss. Gator, set up for a stern approach. These aren't boarding parties. Look at the profile. No personnel on deck. Elena squinted as she closed in. The boats chasing the Constitution were different from the ones at the Halsey. They were lower, sleeker. No wheelhouses, no crew. Just a hull packed with high explosives and a guidance sensor. Suicide drones, Elena realized, a cold chill gripping her heart. Unmanned surface vehicles. They're going to ram the screws and rudder. If those drones hit the carrier's propellers, the Constitution would be dead in the water, a drifting hulk in a typhoon, waiting to be finished off. Anvil II prioritized the lead elements. We have to break their formation before they get under the overhang, Elena ordered. She lined up on the center of the wedge. The carrier loomed massive in her windscreen, a towering cliff of steel. The CIWS phalanx guns on the carrier's stern finally woke up, spitting streams of white tracers, but the sea state was blocking their sensors. The waves were hiding the low-profile drones until the last second. Guns, 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 Elena muttered. She squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 roared again, the vibration shaking her entire body. The ocean erupted in a line of white splashes, walking straight into the lead drone. Crack boom. The drone didn't just sink, it detonated. A massive fireball erupted from the water, turning the rain into steam. The shockwave nearly flipped the drone next to it. They're loaded with high-X, Gator yelled. Don't fly through the plumes. Keep shooting. Elena banked hard to avoid the debris, pulling G-forces that made her vision gray out. She was flying in a chaotic box. The carrier on one side, the water below, the exploding drones in front. She swung around for a second pass. The remaining drones scattered, breaking their V formation. But 3 of them didn't divert. They accelerated, locking onto the heat of the carrier's engines. They were inside the minimum range of the A-10's gun run. They're leaking through, Sterling screamed from above. They're going to hit! Elena looked at her fuel, looked at her ammo count, looked at the drones closing the final 200 yards to the carrier's stern. Not on my watch, she whispered. She pushed the stick forward, diving not at the drones, but between them and the ship. The air behind an aircraft carrier is a chaotic, invisible, violent zone known to aviators as the burble, a swirling vortex of dirty wind created by the massive displacement of the ship smashing through the air. It was dangerous enough to land through. Flying in it, at 50 feet above the water, was suicide. Elena didn't care. She pushed the stick forward, forcing the A-10 into the turbulence. The aircraft bucked wildly, the controls feeling mushy and unresponsive as the smooth airflow over the wings was replaced by the churning wake of the Constitution. The massive gray steel wall of the carrier's stern loomed above her, the 4 giant screws churning the water into a white, frothy maelstrom below. 3 suicide drones were racing toward that white water, their sensors locked on the thermal bloom of the ship's exhaust and the acoustic signature of the propellers. "Major, you're in the blast radius! Pull up!" Gator screamed over the radio. "Negative!" Elena gritted her teeth, fighting the yoke with both hands. "I have to break their lock! They're heat seekers!" She throttled the twin TF-34 engines to maximum power. The A-10 wasn't fast, but its engines were hot. 2 massive heat sources mounted high on the tail. She dropped the aircraft lower, dangerously close to the wave tops, positioning herself directly between the drones and the carrier's hull. She was offering herself as the juicier steak. "Come on, you mindless pieces of junk," she hissed. "Look at me." She punched the CMS, Countermeasures Dispenser System button. Flare, flare, flare. Chunks of burning magnesium shot out from the tail of the Warthog, sizzling into the water. The sudden spike in thermal energy, combined with the roar of the jet engines drowning out the ship's propellers, confused the simple logic of the drone guidance systems. The lead drone twitched. Its camera gimbal snapped up, tracking the intense heat source that had just overlaid the carrier. It banked sharp left, abandoning the ship to chase the A-10. "One is turning," Sterling called out from his perch in the clouds. "It's tracking you, Rossi." The second drone followed suit, swerving violently to intercept the new, hotter target. But the third one, the trailer, stayed the course, boring in on the carrier's rudder. Elena saw it in her peripheral vision. She couldn't shoot it. The angle was wrong, and a ricochet would hit the ship. She had to use physics. She hauled the stick back and slammed the left rudder pedal. The A-10 drifted sideways, its massive wing acting like a sail. She dropped the flaps to maneuver, increasing drag and lift, allowing her to practically hover for a split second right over the rogue drone. "Eat this," she growled. She shoved the throttles to the firewall again. The jet wash, the high-velocity exhaust blasting out of the engines, slammed into the surface of the water like a physical hammer. The concentrated thrust hit the light fiberglass hull of the drone just as it crested a wave. The drone's bow was forced down by the wind blast. It buried itself into the face of the next swell. The momentum cartwheeled the small boat, flipping it keel over deck. The guidance antenna snapped off. The explosives, triggered by the tumbling impact, detonated underwater. Whump! A geyser of water erupted beneath Elena's tail. The shockwave kicked the A-10 upward, slamming Elena's helmet against the canopy. Warning lights lit up the dashboard like a Christmas tree. Hydraulic pressure low. Yaw SAS fail. "I'm hit," she gasped, struggling to regain control as the plane slewed sideways. "You're still flying, Major. You're still flying," Gator yelled. "You got it. The other 2 are following you." Elena fought the controls, her arms burning with lactic acid. She checked her mirrors. The 2 diverted drones were racing after her, skipping over the waves like skipping stones, hungry for the heat of her engines. She had saved the carrier, but now she had 2 flying bombs chasing her tail, and she had just lost her stability augmentation system. "Constitution, this is Anvil," she panted, her voice trembling slightly. "Stern is clear. I'm dragging the trash away. Keep your turn." "Copy, Anvil," the carrier controller replied, and for the first time, the robotic professionalism was gone. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen. Get out of there, pilot. Elena looked ahead into the dark, empty ocean. She had to lead these things far enough away that when she killed them, or they killed her, the ship wouldn't feel a thing. "Gator," she said, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Clear the area. I'm taking them for a ride." The cockpit was a cacophony of alarms. The master caution light pulsed in time with Elena's heartbeat. The two suicide drones were relentless, skimming the wave tops at 45 knots, their guidance systems locked onto the twin heat plumes of her engines. "They're closing, Major. Range 300 yards. Gator's voice was frantic in her ear. He was holding a high orbit, helpless to intervene without risking hitting her with his own cannon fire. Elena checked her airspeed, 220 knots. She couldn't outrun them indefinitely, not with the heavy drag of the weapons pylons and the turbulence battering the airframe. If she tried to turn normally, the drones would simply cut across the radius and intercept her. Simple geometry. She had to use physics against them. She had to do what a machine couldn't predict. "I'm taking them vertical," Elena grunted, her hand tightening on the stick until the leather glove creaked. She hauled back on the controls. The A-10 groaned, the G-forces crushing Elena into her seat as the nose pitched up violently. She traded her kinetic energy for potential energy, climbing straight up into the storm clouds. The drones, programmed for surface attack but adaptable, pitched up to follow. They were fast, but they lacked wings. They relied on raw thrust and hydrofoils. As they tried to climb the steep angle, gravity began to drag them down. Elena watched her airspeed bleed away. 200, 180, 150. The aircraft shuddered. The buffet of a pre-stall condition rattled the stick in her hands. This was the edge of the envelope, the point where the planes stopped flying and started falling. "Come on, stay with me," she whispered to the machine. At 120 knots, just as the nose began to slice through the cloud base, she made her move. She slammed the left rudder pedal to the floor and chopped the throttle on the left engine while firewalling the right. It was a brutal, uncoordinated input that no flight manual would ever recommend. The A-10 didn't bank. It pivoted. The heavy nose swung around on its axis, cartwheeling through the sky like a thrown hammer. For a split second, the aircraft was flying sideways, the aerodynamics screaming in protest. The yaw SAS failure light burned bright red. The stability computer had given up. This was all hands and feet. Elena's vision tunneled. The G-load hit her laterally, snapping her head against the canopy rail. She fought the blackness, forcing her eyes to stay open. As the nose dropped back toward the ocean, gravity took over. She was now diving straight down, directly at the two drones that were stalled at the apex of their climb, hanging momentarily motionless in the air as they tried to calculate where their target had gone. "Surprise," Elena hissed. The ocean filled her windscreen. The drones were two gray specks growing larger by the millisecond. She didn't need the computer sight. At this range, it was point blank. She squeezed the trigger. "Bert!" The GAU-8 Avenger roared, the recoil slowing her dive just enough to keep her from auguring into the water. A storm of 30mm shells engulfed the lead drone. It didn't just explode. It evaporated, turned into a cloud of fiberglass splinters and fire. Elena walked the rudder, shifting the stream of lead to the second drone just as it began to tip over and fall back toward the water. The rounds caught it mid-air. The explosion was massive, a blossom of orange flame that lit up the dark underbelly of the storm clouds. "Pull up! Pull up!" Betty screamed. Elena hauled back on the stick with both hands, groaning with the effort. The ocean surface rushed up to meet her. Black water, white foam, certain death. The A-10 bottomed out of the dive at 50 feet. The spray from the waves washed over the canopy, obscuring her vision for a terrifying second. Then, the lift caught. The heavy wings flexed, and the Warthog climbed away, streaming vapor from its wingtips. "Splash 2!" Gator yelled, his voice cracking. "Major, that was impossible." Elena slumped in her seat, gasping for air. Her arms felt like lead. Her neck throbbed. The aircraft was vibrating badly now. She had likely overstressed the airframe or popped a few rivets during the snap turn. "Not impossible," she wheezed, checking her engine instruments. "Just ill-advised." She leveled off, her hands shaking. The immediate threat was gone, but the adrenaline crash was hitting her hard. "Status check, Gator," she managed to say. "I'm clear. You're smoking a bit from the left engine, Major, but you're flying." Elena looked back toward the Constitution. The carrier was turning again, its deck lights finally cutting through the gloom. It was safe. "Let's finish this," Elena said, though every muscle in her body wanted to sleep. Anvil flight, reforming. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, shaking exhaustion. Elena leveled the A-10 off at 500 feet, her eyes scanning the instruments. The left engine temperature gauge was hovering near the red line, likely foreign object damage from the drone debris, and the hydraulic pressure was steady but low. "Anvil flight status," she croaked. Her throat felt like she had swallowed broken glass. "2 is forming up on your wing," Gator replied. "I'm showing low fuel, Major. We need to get on the deck soon. I don't think I have enough for a go-around." "Copy. We're heading home." Elena began a gentle bank toward the vector for FOB Sandstone. The storm was finally starting to break. To the west, a sliver of moonlight pierced the heavy cloud layer, illuminating the battlefield below. The sea was still churning, but the rain had softened to a drizzle. "Major! Tally-ho! 9 o'clock low!" Gator's voice spiked with alarm. Elena looked down. In the break in the weather, she saw the USS Halsey. The destroyer was dead in the water, smoke still drifting from its superstructure. Rigid hull inflatable boats, RHIBs, from the Constitution were in the water, circling the destroyer, pulling survivors out of the heavy swells. But cutting across, the waves, ignoring the chaos, was one last shadow. It was a straggler. A single fast attack craft that had been separated from the main swarm during the initial engagement. It was damaged, smoke trailing from its stern, but it was moving with purpose, heading straight for the cluster of rescue boats. "He's going for the medics," Elena realized with a sick feeling in her gut. "He wants to take as many with him as he can." She slammed the stick over, diving back toward the water. "Anvil 1, engaging!" She lined up the Piper on the small boat. The distance closed rapidly. 2,000 yards, 1,000. She squeezed the trigger. Click. The gun spun, a high-pitched electric whine, but there was no roar, no vibration, no tracers. "Winchester! I'm Winchester!" Elena shouted, slamming her hand against the dashboard in frustration. The drum was empty. She had spent every last round saving the carrier. "I'm dry too, Major," Gator yelled. "I emptied the drum on the first pass." The enemy boat was closing in. 500 yards from the defenseless RHIBs, the sailors in the rescue boats were looking up, waving frantically, trusting the angels overhead to save them. Elena looked at the enemy boat. It was small, maybe 20 feet long, light fiberglass. "Gator, stay high," Elena said, her voice dropping to a determined growl. "I'm going to blow him over." "Major, you don't have the ammo." "I have engines," she said. Elena pushed the throttles to the stops. She didn't pull up. She pushed the nose down. She wasn't aiming to hit the boat. She was aiming for the space just above it. "Show of force," she whispered. "Let's see how you handle a hurricane." The A-10 screamed down, dropping to 20 feet above the water. The airspeed indicator touched 350 knots. She was flying so low that the salt spray was coating her windshield faster than the rain. The enemy boat filled her field of view. She could see the pilot now, a lone figure in the stern, looking back in terror as the massive, dark shape of the Warthog descended on him like a falling building. Elena held her breath. She passed directly over the boat, missing the radio antenna by inches. As the aircraft roared over, the massive displacement of air, combined with the raw jet blast from the two TF-34 engines, hit the water with the force of a physical bomb. The wake turbulence, tornadoes of horizontal air spinning off her wingtips, slammed into the light skiff. Elena pulled up hard into a vertical climb, checking her mirrors. Behind her, the ocean erupted in white foam. The enemy boat didn't just capsize, it was cartwheeled. The bow was lifted violently into the air by the jet wash, and the vessel flipped backward, smashing upside down into the heavy swell. The hull shattered. The threat disappeared under the white water. "Target neutralized!" Gator shouted, his voice thick with awe. "He's gone! You flipped him like a toy!" Elena leveled off at 2,000 feet, her chest heaving. She watched as the rescue boats continued their work, undisturbed. "Anvil 1 to Constitution," she keyed the mic, her hand trembling uncontrollably now. "Sector clear. All hostiles down. We are running on fumes and prayers. Returning to base." "Copy, Anvil," the carrier controller replied. "We see it. The Admiral sends his regards. You are cleared for straight-in approach. Welcome home." Elena looked out the canopy. The clouds were breaking apart. The moon was shining on the wings of her battered jet. "Let's go home, Gator," she said softly. "I'm done." The return flight was a blur of warning lights and mechanical groans. The storm had moved east, leaving behind a wet, heavy silence over the island of sandstone. Elena approached the airfield not as a conqueror, but as a survivor nursing a wounded beast. "Anvil 1, check gear down and locked," Elena muttered, her voice raspy. She moved the heavy lever. Thunk, thunk, silence. The nose gear light remained dark. The main gear lights were green, but the nose was an unknown variable. The hydraulic system pressure was bouncing near zero. If the nose gear wasn't locked, the moment she touched down, the front of the plane would collapse, driving the cannon into the concrete and likely flipping the aircraft. "Tower Anvil 1. Indication failure on nose gear. Request visual check on flyby," she radioed. "Negative, Anvil. No time," the tower controller replied, his voice strangely soft. "You're leaking fuel bad, Major. We see a vapor trail. Put it on the deck now. Emergency crews are rolling." Elena swallowed hard. She didn't have the fuel to circle. She had to trust the mechanical latch. "Copy. Landing straight in." She lined up with the runway. The lights were bright, reflecting off the wet tarmac like a mirror. She kept the nose high, flaring aggressively to bleed off speed, intending to keep the front wheel off the ground for as long as physically possible. The main tires kissed the concrete, a screech of rubber that vibrated through her spine. She pulled the stick back into her lap, holding the nose up, riding a wheelie at 120 knots. As the speed bled off, the elevators lost authority. The nose began to drop. "Please lock, please lock." The nose wheel hit the runway. It held. The aircraft shuddered as she stood on the brakes, the anti-skid system fighting to keep her from hydroplaning into the jungle. The A-10 groaned, slowing down from a weapon of war to a heavy, clumsy collection of metal parts. She taxied off the active runway and into the transient apron. Fire trucks and ambulances swarmed around them, flashing red and blue lights painting the wet fuselage. Gator taxied in next to her, his aircraft looking just as battered. Elena pulled the mixture levers to cut off. The engines wound down, the high-pitched whine descending into a low moan before dying completely. Silence rushed into the cockpit. It was deafening. Elena sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the throttle quadrant. She was shaking. The adrenaline crash was hitting her with the force of a sledgehammer. She unbuckled her harness, popped the canopy, and the humid tropical air flooded in, smelling of ozone, burnt jet fuel, and the distinct metallic tang of the hot gun barrels. She climbed down the ladder, her legs feeling like jelly. Her boots hit the wet concrete, and she had to grab the ladder rail to steady herself. A jeep pulled up, tires screeching. Commander Sterling jumped out. He wasn't wearing his flight gear anymore. He was in his working uniform. Behind him, the Admiral's staff car was approaching. Elena straightened up. She took a breath, preparing herself. She had disobeyed a direct order. She had stolen an aircraft. She had endangered her wingman. She squared her shoulders, ready to be arrested. Sterling walked up to her. He stopped 3 feet away. He looked at the A-10. The nose was covered in soot from the gun firing. The wings were scarred. The paint was scorched. Steam was rising from the GAU-8 barrels, sizzling as the rain hit the hot metal. Then he looked at Elena. His face was unreadable, the harsh lines of his jaw set tight. "Major Rossi," he said. "Commander," Elena replied, keeping her voice flat. "I take full responsibility. My wingman followed my lead. If you're going to file charges, file them against me." Sterling looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he took off his cap. He looked down at the ground, then back up at the ugly, slow, brutish airplane that towered over them. "The Constitution is safe," Sterling said quietly. "The rudder is intact. We're recovering the air wing now." "I know," Elena said. Sterling let out a long breath. "We couldn't get a lock. The fastest jets in the world, and we were blind. You went into the burble." He shook his head, as if he still couldn't believe the physics of it. "I saw what you did with that last drone. That wasn't in any manual." "No, sir," Elena said. "It wasn't." The Admiral's car door opened. Admiral Vance stepped out. He walked through the puddles, ignoring the umbrella his aide offered. He walked straight up to Elena. Elena snapped a salute. "Admiral." Vance didn't return it immediately. He looked at the steam rising from the gun. He looked at the empty pylons. "I ordered you to stand down, Major," Vance said. "Yes, sir, you did." "And you ignored the chain of command, risked 2 government assets, and violated safety protocols." "Yes, sir." Vance stared at her. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then, the corners of his mouth twitched. "Good thing you did," Vance said. He returned the salute, sharp and crisp. "Because if you had listened to me, 5,000 sailors would be swimming right now. The Halsey reports 0 casualties. The carrier is operational." Vance lowered his hand. "Commander Sterling tells me the A-10 isn't suited for maritime operations." Sterling cleared his throat, looking at the massive 30mm cannon. "I may have miscalculated the variables, Admiral. It appears there is a capability gap in our littoral defense doctrine." "Fix it," Vance said. He looked at Elena. "Get some sleep, Major, and tell your crew chief to paint a kill marking on that nose. A boat. I think you earned it." The Admiral turned and walked away. Sterling lingered for a second. He looked at Elena, and for the first time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by the begrudging respect of one warrior for another. "Nice flying, Anvil," he said, "for a flying tank." "Thanks, Viper," Elena replied, a tired smile finally touching her lips. "Next time, try slowing down. You see more." Sterling walked away into the darkness. Elena turned back to her aircraft. She reached out and patted the cold, rivet-studded aluminum of the nose, right next to the smoking gun. "Good girl," she whispered. The storm was over. The doctrine had changed, and the Warthog had found a new home.